video is about the distance and midpoint formulas. Before we can launch into the distance formula, we need to practice simplifying square roots. If you're asked to simplify a square root, that means take the square root if you can. This is asking us for the square root of 81. It's only asking for the positive answer. So the square root of 81, you should know, is 9. So if it has a square root and you're asked to simplify it, you just give the square root. If it doesn't have a square root, like the square root of 80 does not exist as a whole number, it's what we call an irrational number, we need to simplify it if we can. The simplest way to do it is to break 80 into 2 of its factors, and one of the factors has to be a perfect square. So if it helps you to have a list of your perfect squares, you can always write down 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared, and so on. You're looking for one of these numbers, right, that goes into 80. So one of these numbers that is a factor of 80. We know that 4 is a factor of 80, but we want to go higher if we can. And I know that 16 is a factor of 80 as well. So I'm going to split 80 into 16 and 5, because 16 times 5 is 80. So I've split 80 into 2 of its factors, both still underneath the square root sign, because root 16 times root 5 is root 80. Now one of these 2 square roots can be simplified, and that's the 16. Square root of 16 is 4, not underneath the square root sign anymore, but 5 does stay underneath the square root sign because it doesn't have a whole number square root, so we're going to leave it underneath. So this is the simplified version of the square root of 80. So when we're asked to leave our answers in simplest radical form, we're going to simplify the square root if we can and leave it like that. Do not take out a calculator and get a decimal as your answer. So here's the distance formula. To find the distance between 2 points on the coordinate plane. It looks complicated. It's actually just a squared plus b squared equals c squared by another name. So it's the distance formula. When you're given 2 points, simply fill them into the formula. Each point is an x value followed by a y value. We can label the first pair x1 and y1, and the second pair x2 and y2. So when we fill it in, we can just directly plug into this formula with the numbers that we're given. So we're looking for the distance between these 2 points. That's why it's d equals a long square root sign. In the first parentheses, it's the second x value minus the first x value. That whole quantity is squared. And there's an addition sign. In the second parentheses, it's the second y value minus the first y value. And that quantity is squared as well. We're going to work from the inside out here. So we want to do what's in our parentheses first. 6 minus negative 4 is 10. I can drop the parentheses. I'll keep the parentheses, just in case it was negative, as you'll see here. When it's 0 minus 6, we've got a negative. We want to keep our parentheses around that so you don't forget that it's a negative number being multiplied by a negative number because it's squared. That comes out positive. So 10 squared is 100. Negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. And it ends up being the square root of 136. Now it's going to ask us to leave our answer in simplest radical form. So 136 does not have a square root, but I know that I can split it into 2 of its factors. 4 has a square root, and 34 does not. So since they're both underneath the square root sign still, I'm going to simplify the one that can be simplified, which is the square root of 4, becoming 2. Leave the one that can't be simplified underneath the square root, and that's the distance between these 2 points in simplest radical form. Totally separate formula, though often taught at the same time, is the midpoint formula. So this is not asking you about the distance between 2 points. It's saying if I was to put a point halfway in between 2 points, where would that point go? So it's asking you for the coordinates of a new point, the coordinates of the midpoint. It's a complicated looking formula that basically just means take the average of your x values, right? Add them together and divide by 2. And then take the average of your y values. Add those together and divide by 2 to get the point that would fall right in the middle. So to find our x coordinate, we're going to add our 2 x values together, divide by 2 to find the average. Negative 4 plus 6 is 2, divided by 2 is 1. To find our y coordinate, we will add our 2 y values together. Doesn't matter what order you add in. Divide by 2. So 0 plus 3 divided by 2. We'll leave it as just a simplified fraction. You don't need to get a decimal answer. And so the coordinates of our midpoint, which we usually call M, are 1, comma, 3 over 2. So this is a point, right? A point is always a coordinate x, comma, y. So our midpoint is located at 1, comma, 3/2. And then sometimes you're asked to work backwards with that formula. So here, they're saying M is the midpoint of the segment. They're giving us M, and they're giving us one of the coordinates that's on the segment, so 8, 1. But they're not giving us B, which is the other endpoint. So to find it, we're going to have to set up a formula, an equation using our x midpoint formula. So right, to find the x value, the formula was, I'll write it in the same order that you'll have it, x1 plus x2, right? Add your two x values together and divide by 2. This x here is the x coordinate of your midpoint. So we have the x coordinate of our midpoint. We know that the x coordinate of our midpoint is going to come out to -2. So we're going to fill this x value in. This is the x coordinate of the first endpoint, which we have, that's 8. What we don't know is this. We don't know the second point that leads us to getting the midpoint. So we're going to leave this as the unknown variable. And if you look at everything we filled in, there's only one thing we don't know, and that's the x coordinate of the other endpoint. To solve this equation, this is just some simple algebra. We want to get rid of this 2 that's our denominator by multiplication, so it ends up being -4 equals 8 plus our x2. To solve for that x2, we want to subtract 8. -4 minus 8 is -12. And there's the x coordinate of our other endpoint. You don't have to do anything to the sub 2. It doesn't mean squared. It's not even math. It just is a notation that shows it's from the second point. We need to do the same thing to figure out our y coordinate. The formula was this. We are given the y value of our midpoint. We know that that's supposed to come out to -3. We're given the first y value from our first endpoint. That's 1. We don't know the second y value because we don't know the second point. And we're going to solve this the same way. We're going to deal with this 2 by multiplication. Deal with the 1 by subtraction. And there's the y coordinate of our other point. So we just write our final answer as B, which was the endpoint we were looking for, located at -12, comma, -7. And that is all.